Hi there! Emily Midget here today with a video for Ellen Hudson using some new Leading Lady stamps and dies. These Leading Lady stamps are great for paper piecing, watercoloring, colored pencils, and Copic coloring, but I wanted to get some Copic practice in. The images are quite nicely sized, perfect for getting in the nooks and crannies. Let's get started. I began by stamping the teacher lady with some Hero Arts Intense Black ink onto some Copic-friendly white cardstock. I chose R24, 27, 29, and 39 with touches of T7 to color her teacher's apple red shirt. One of the great things about the Leading Lady product line is that they are so nicely sized. You can really practice your shading and shadows on such a generously sized image. I start by laying down my lightest shade, R24, in the areas that will be the darkest, leaving the lightest areas white. In this case, her stomach. I leave the lightest areas white so that I can get as few layers of color on them as possible. With Copic markers, I have found that the more layers of color you add, the more saturated your colored image will be. Ensuring only one layer of color will allow that sweet spot to be as light as possible. After I lay down my initial layer of R24, I go back and add R27, 29, and 39, decreasing the amount of color laid down with each marker. I then begin blending them out. I start with the darkest color, which has the least amount of color on the die cut, and blend it with the next lightest color. So I blend R39 with R29, R29 with R27, and so forth. I allow the alcohol ink to work with itself, allowing plenty of color to flow from my markers, with one final wash of color over that sweet spot in the center. Because my Copic collection is not complete by any means, I have to improvise sometimes when it comes to attaining the contrast that I seek. Contrast is my ultimate goal when it comes to coloring in any medium. Shadows are created by contrasting light and dark, and so to add contrast to this image, I add touches of T7 to the areas that I think would have the most shadows, in this case under the arms, at the bottom of the shirt, and on the top of the shoulders by her hair. I blend these touches of dark gray out using the red Copics, again starting with the darkest and working my way to the lightest, but not allowing quite as much ink to flow from my marker. I have found that if you get too many layers of alcohol ink, the paper cannot hold such a large amount of ink, and it will start to pill or simply flake off. I have always loved the retro color combination of bright red and turquoise, so I decided to color the teacher's pants with BG 131549 with touches of T7. Again, my Copic collection is not complete, but one of the things that I'm really trying to work on is using my Copic colors out of numerical order. If you allow the alcohol inks to work together, you can achieve some wonderful color combinations, even if the colors aren't technically in order. After experimenting with different color combinations on a piece of scrap paper, I found that these colors worked quite well together. I used the same technique to color the pants, leaving a sweet spot in the center where the color would be the lightest, then blending the colors from the outside in, from darkest to lightest. I do not profess to be an expert on Copic coloring by any stretch of the imagination, and hair is definitely a daunting task in any medium. I tried to keep coloring her hair fairly simple, using the lines drawn on the image to determine where my shading would go and keeping some areas lighter to add contrast. I used my basic shading theory that the hair in the back would be darker simply because it's in the shadows, while the hair on top would be lighter and have shine from the light hitting it. After coloring her entire head, I went back in with T10 and added some flecks of dark gray, the color I had closest to black, to further emphasize the high and low lights. In order to create a sort of ground for my teacher lady so that she wasn't floating in midair on my card front, I first die cut an Altenew plaid background cover plate die from some red foil cardstock. I then used a circular Hero Arts Infinity die to cut from the center of that plaid die cut. For some reason, plaid seems to signify teacher to me, probably from my days of wearing a plaid kilt in Catholic grade school. Do you remember those alphabet borders stapled to the bulletin board in your kindergarten classroom? I used the school items included in the Teacher Lady stamp set to create a border around the edge of the card front to recreate those borders from my youth. I stamped them in a random pattern around the edge of the card front using Hero Arts silver ink. After completing my border, I determined placement for my greeting from the Teacher Lady stamp set, then used my Misty to stamp it in black. I adhered the plaid circle with liquid adhesive, then added the die-cut teacher with some foam adhesive. Well, that's all for this project. I hope I've inspired you to try some out-of-the-box Copic combinations. My philosophy is that it's only paper, and if it doesn't work, you can always try again with another piece of paper. Thanks so much for watching, and have a marvelous day.